The blue light of my phone at 11:51 p.m. wasn't just a notification, it was a death warrant for the girl I used to be. As I stared at the words, "Courtney is devastated, we need to hold space for her grief," the daughter who had spent 18 years swallowing her own heart to keep this family afloat finally died. My parents didn't realize that by choosing my sister's manufactured influencer of trauma over the one milestone I had paid for with my own blood and sweat, they hadn't just canceled the party. They had handed me the match to burn their perfect, ivory tower empire to the ground. They thought I was the reliable one who would always absorb the blow. They were about to find out that when you push the person who holds up the walls, the entire house comes screaming down. To understand why I eventually had to watch my parents load their lives into a U-Haul while the neighbors whispered in the streets of Buckhead, you have to understand the architecture of the house I grew up in. We lived in a sprawling, white brick mansion in Atlanta, a place that looked like a wedding cake on the outside but felt like a cold, sterile museum on the inside. My parents, Jeffrey and Cynthia, didn't raise daughters, they curated assets. My sister Courtney, 6 years my senior, was the show pony. She was an influencer, a title that, in our house, carried more weight than a medical degree. She had 1 million followers, most of them bots, and a personality that required high-speed internet and constant validation to function. I was Morgan. I was the shadow manager. I was the one who, at 14, realized my father couldn't navigate a basic spreadsheet, so I began quietly balancing the household books. I was the one who ghostwrote Courtney's college essays because she couldn't spell the word accountability without a PR team. I managed my mother's chaotic social calendar, coordinated the domestic staff, and acted as the permanent affixer every time Courtney's latest internet scandal threatened the family's social standing. The disparity wasn't just emotional, it was financial. Courtney lived on a monthly allowance of $6,500, a brand maintenance fund that paid for her fillers, her fast fashion hauls, and her daily $15 lattes. I received zero. Not a cent. My father told me that a struggle builds character, while he signed off on an $18,000 check for Courtney to have imported Italian velvet curtains for her bedroom renovation. I worked 3 nights a week as a virtual assistant for a tech firm in California, staying up until 3 a.m. just to pay for my AP textbooks and save for a future they clearly weren't going to fund. For years, I lived in a state of fawn response. I believed that if I just made myself indispensable, if I just fixed enough of their problems, they would eventually see me. I thought my labor was the rent I had to pay just to exist in their orbit. I was the load-bearing wall of a house of cards, convinced that if I ever stopped holding them up, I would be the one who was crushed. When my 18th birthday approached, I didn't ask them for a party. I knew better. I worked double shifts for 6 months to save for a small, elegant dinner at a venue I loved. I invited my few close friends, my teachers, the people who actually knew my name. I wanted one night where I wasn't the shadow. One night where I was the main character. Then came the text. Courtney had lost a Sephora brand deal, a minor partnership worth maybe $2,000, because she'd been caught being rude to a flight attendant. To my parents, this was a national tragedy. My mother's text wasn't a request, it was a command. My birthday was collateral damage in the war of Courtney's ego. The morning of my birthday, the house was a tomb. My parents had spirited Courtney away to a high-end spa retreat in the Blue Ridge Mountains to help her process the loss. They left a generic, happy birthday card on the kitchen island with a $50 bill tucked inside. No note. Just the cash, the kind of tip you'd give a valet for a job well done. I stood in that silent kitchen, the marble countertops cold under my hands, and I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something inside me snap into place. It was the cold, metallic click of a lock. I realized then that they didn't miss me when I wasn't there, they only missed the service I provided. And if I was just a service provider, then it was time to resign. I moved with surgical precision. Over the previous 6 months, I had been quietly moving my essentials to a small storage unit I'd rented under my work alias. Now, I finished the job. I packed my diplomas, my laptop, and the few sentimental items I'd kept hidden from Courtney's habit of borrowing and losing my things. I opened my laptop and wiped every family spreadsheet I had ever created. I deleted the password vaults, the contact databases, and the automated bill pay schedules I'd set up for my father's business. I left my house key on the counter next to a single sheet of paper. On it, I listed every password I had changed that morning: banking, utilities, social media, the security system. At the bottom, I wrote a single sentence: I am resigning from the position of daughter. Do not contact me for technical support. I drove away from Buckhead that afternoon and didn't look back. I moved into a tiny, 400-square-foot studio apartment in a part of town my mother wouldn't visit without a bodyguard. It smelled like old wood and independence. For the first week, my phone was a ghost town. They were waiting for me to crawl back, humbled by the struggle they'd promised would build my character. They expected me to realize that I couldn't survive without the prestige of their name. What they didn't realize was that they were the ones who couldn't survive without mine. By the second week, the system failure began. My father called 16 times in one afternoon. He didn't leave a message, but I knew the script. The Wi-Fi was down. The pool guy hadn't been paid. The quarterly tax documents were missing. Without me to navigate the friction of their daily lives, the gears were grinding to a halt. Courtney missed a flight to a critical influencer summit in Miami because she couldn't figure out how to use the corporate travel app one had managed for her. She left a voicemail that was 90% screeching and 10% legal threats. I sat on my floor, eating takeout and listening to the chaos from a distance. I realized that my parents weren't actually wealthy in the way powerful people are. They were performers. Their entire existence was a stage set of debt, favors, and my invisible labor. When you remove the stage manager, the audience finally sees that the castle is made of painted plywood. They weren't collapsing because of bad luck, they were collapsing because they were functionally incompetent. I spent the next year accelerating. I worked 40 hours a week at a fintech startup while taking a full course load. I graduated summa cum laude a semester early. By 21, I was an operations lead, making a six-figure salary and building a life that didn't require permission. I watched their downfall from social media like a distant weather event. Courtney had been blacklisted by the top 3 agencies for being difficult, industry code 4, untalented and entitled. My parents were quietly selling off assets. The vintage Porsche went first. Then the Highlands vacation home. They were selling the props to keep the lights on. I felt a clinical pity for them, but no urge to help. I was finally breathing air that didn't taste like obligation. Then, the floor dropped out. I had found a dream loft in Midtown, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, the ultimate I made it a space. I walked into the leasing office with my pay stubs and my confidence. The agent, a woman who had been perfectly friendly, suddenly turned her monitor away from me. Her face went pale. "I'm sorry, Morgan," she whispered. "There's a major flag on your credit report. A massive outstanding debt. We can't move forward." I went to my car, my heart a dull thud in my chest. I pulled up my full credit report, expecting a clerical error. What I saw was an execution. 4 new accounts had been opened in the last 11 months. 3 high-limit credit cards and a personal loan. The total balance was $282,419. I scrolled through the transaction history, and the map of Courtney's life unfolded before me. $40,000 for a rebranding trip to Tulum. $12,000 for a wardrobe overhaul. A $60,000 down payment on a G-Wagon Courtney claimed was a brand partnership, $15,000 for emergency home repairs at the Buckhead estate. They hadn't just stolen my money, they had harvested my identity to subsidize their delusion. They knew I had a high-paying job. They knew my credit was pristine because I had managed it like a hawk. In their minds, this wasn't a crime. It was reimbursement. They believed I owed them this for the character they had helped me build by ignoring me for 2 decades. A cold, metallic calm settled over me. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a federal crime. They had bet on my silence. They had bet that I was still the fawn, the girl who would swallow their poison to keep them warm. They bet their lives on a lie. I didn't call my mother. I didn't send a frantic text to my father. I called a forensic accountant and a lawyer named Helen who specialized in high-asset family fraud. Helen was a shark in a Chanel suit. When I showed her the files, she didn't smile, but her eyes lit up. They didn't even try to hide the IP addresses, Helen said, scrolling through the login data for the credit card applications. They did this from the home office in Buckhead. It's almost insultingly sloppy. The process was surgical. We compiled the unauthorized signatures, the timelines of my departure, and the direct links to Courtney's social media posts showing off the very items purchased with the stolen funds. We didn't send a warning. We served them. A process server walked up to the front door of the cake house on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there, but the fallout reached me in minutes. My phone became a thermal detonator. "Morgan, stop this madness," my mother wailed into a voicemail. "It's family money. We were just borrowing your credit until the next investment cleared. You're going to destroy us. You ungrateful brat," my father hissed in a text. "After everything we gave you, you're going to put your own father in prison over a few spreadsheets?" I didn't respond. I let the law do the talking. Because the lawsuit was a matter of public record, the Buckhead gossip and machine took care of the rest. In that world, reputation is the only currency that matters, and theirs was now worthless. The news that Jeffrey and Cynthia were being sued by their own daughter for nearly $300,000 in identity theft hit the country club circuit like a bomb. Investors pulled out of my father's flailing firm. The social invitations evaporated. They were radioactive. 2 weeks later, my doorman buzzed me. My parents were in the lobby. I told him to let them up. When they walked into my loft, they looked like ghosts. My father's suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. My mother's face was swollen from crying, her expensive highlights grown out and dull. They stood in my living room, a space I had earned, and they looked small. "Please," my father said, his voice cracking. "Morgan, drop the lawsuit. If this goes to a criminal grand jury, I'll lose my license. We'll lose the house. We'll be on the street." I looked at them. I really looked at them. For years, I had imagined this moment, the moment they would crawl back and finally see me. I thought I would feel a rush of triumph. I thought I would feel the heat of 1,000 suns in my chest as I finally told them off. But as I watched my mother weep onto my hardwood floors, I felt nothing. It wasn't hate. It wasn't love. It was a profound, clinical indifference. I realized then that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's the quiet peace of no longer caring if they live or die. Hate is a fire that requires your energy to keep burning. Indifference is just the cold ash that remains. I was finally free, not because I had one, but because they no longer had the power to make me feel anything at all. "I won't drop the lawsuit," I said. My voice was level, devoid of the tremors that used to define our interactions. "But I will offer you a settlement." Hope flickered in my father's eyes. "Anything. We'll pay you back, I swear." "You'll do more than that," I said. "You will liquidate the estate. Every car, every piece of art, every Italian velvet curtain. You will pay off every cent of the debt you took out in my name, plus interest and my legal fees, immediately. You will sign a formal, notarized confession admitting to the fraud so that I can clear my record with the credit bureaus. And then, you will sign a permanent no-contact order." My mother gasped. "Morgan, you can't mean that. We're your family." "No," I said, standing up to show them the door. "You were my employers. And I resigned a long time ago. If you ever contact me again, if you so much as like a photo of mine on social media, the settlement is void, and I will hand these files to the district attorney. I'm not playing a game, Dad. I'm closing an account." They signed. They had no choice. 6 months later, I drove my new car, one I bought with a clean credit score and my own money, past the old house in Buckhead one last time. There was a "sold" sign in the yard. A moving truck was parked in the circular driveway. I watched from a block away as my parents loaded boxes into a rented U-Haul. Courtney was sitting on the curb, staring at her phone, looking for someone else to blame for the fact that her influencer life was over. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I didn't feel a single pang of regret. I just kept driving toward Midtown, toward my loft, and toward the life I had built for